Well, welcome to this episode of Why We Plan. I'm John Brown, founder of BEI. And with us today is Tom Baer, senior partner in a regional CPA firm. And Tom's now located in Indianapolis, Indiana. But you've got offices in Illinois as well.
Right. We're the CPA practice is primarily Midwest based. We have offices across the country, and some of those are really just technology focused offices.
Okay. Well, you started exit planning a long time ago.
We did. We met BEI at a accounting alliance meeting in Chicago or in Boston, I think, probably over 10 years ago.
Wow.
And that's when we were really looking for a product to start to deliver to our clients, recognizing the market need for exit planning.
Excellent. So what I want to talk about today, at least in part, is the whole exit planning practice from a practical standpoint. What do advisors really do to create a successful exit planning practice? And that'll also help the owners looking in on this podcast to be able to gauge the ability of their advisors in terms of exit planning experience. What should they be looking for? And the first hurdle I think a lot of us face as advisors is getting the attention of business owners about the need to plan for their exit years before their planned exit date. And we see all the time as advisors, you do, I'm sure, owners coming to you who say, I'm ready to exit now, rather than maybe the 5 or 10 years it might take to really plan and implement an exit plan. So one, is that accurate in your world? And what do you do to prevent that? What action can you take as a firm and as Tom Baer to get the attention of owners?
Well, it's a great discussion to have, and it really revolves around time. And we spend a lot of time talking to audiences of business owners, of their key advisors, when we do seminars about time, and it takes time. And to your point, John, business owners can't come to you 2 years before they're ready to exit, because there's a direct correlation between how much time you have before you really intend or have to exit, and the options you have. In other words, the less time you have, the less options you have. And many times business owners prefer an option of transitioning a business internally. And many times they don't have enough time to do that. And because there's time for the buyer, being maybe key employees, they have to prepare themselves to be in that next role. And that could be competencies they need to sort of gain, but it also can be getting comfortable with the financial risk that they might take. It's a lot of things. I mean, it's a big decision for them. So time is clearly one of the biggest issues that we try to talk to business owners about. Recently, I'll give an example, and to your point, and this is probably an extreme example. Recently met with we have a new client, and they're in a technology business, and they're a startup business. They've got intellectual property. They've got this technology that they have patented and developed, and it's starting to generate revenue. And we started talking about their exit. What's their exit eventually going to look like? And they're gonna have a liquidity event at some point. And at that point, you really have to start thinking about exit planning. And if you think about, for example, this example of a company, the type of entity they're in, their agreements, their governance agreements, if they take on new investors, making sure those agreements are in place. It's really all the due diligence items that you would have to go through before you'd sell your business. The business owners at that moment, when they started to create value, really need to think about those things. Not the least of which is, in this case, we had 2 owners. They need to think about protecting their families and their own equity and wealth, and have a strategy in place that the other owner would potentially have insurance or something to buy out their equity piece. And then the question is, well, you've just lost half of the key team, to develop that product. So you've got all of these things you got to think about. And so whether they're 25 or 45 or 65, there's really planning to be done. And the other thing I would say that I have learned since getting into this area of consulting, which, by the way, for any professional out there, is so rewarding and so challenging and so exciting to be in, because you face new challenges every day when you work with unique business owners. But one of the things that I have found is that the time it takes is limitless, right? And so what I mean to say is these engagements really never go away, right? They never go away, and so you start working with the business owner as their exit planning or succession planning advisor. You really they become a client in that space for a very long time.
And I know when I practiced law for years, we would often end up representing the original buyers in their exit planning.
Yeah.
And you're right, that you have a lifetime client in exit planning very often. I mean, if it's a third-party sale, on the other hand, that might be the end of the relationship. But most of the exit plans our exit planners prepare are inside transfers. We're going to transfer the business to the kids or to a management team, maybe a co-owner, and that then continues the professional relationship. And you're right, it's just very rewarding to see that happen, to see the business stay in the community and so on. So when you have an initial meeting with the business owner, not a client of yours, let's assume it's not a client, what does that conversation look like? How do you describe what you do? Do you do anything in advance of the meeting and sending information out to the owner about exit planning or what you do? How does that whole thing work?
So usually when I meet with a prospect, right, a business owner, a group of business owners, and let me back up and say, one of the benefits of BEI and being involved in BEI and being around all these other advisors and gaining the experience and coming to the conference and hearing the case studies that others are doing, in addition to your own experiences, it just builds a level of confidence in you as an advisor. And, I have certainly, gained that over the years. You walking into those meetings, and you really have a very little reservation that you're not going to be able to talk at a level and talk directly with business owners about what they need. So I typically, I'll try to learn about the business, and I can think I've had several of these meetings in the last couple months. With one was with a professional services firm, another with an ag company, ag retail company, just a couple that are off the top of my head. And you really just walk in and try to have a comfortable conversation with the business owner or business owners about what their plans are. And it doesn't have to be threatening. You have to get to the point where they're comfortable talking about, some intimate plans that they have. But as an experienced advisor, once you get to a point where you are confident and you understand the process you're going to take them through, it becomes very easy and it becomes very quickly obvious to that prospect that you know what you're talking about, and they get comfortable. And really, they share a lot of information in that initial meeting. It's quite interesting. I mean, everybody, which is correct, everybody assumes it's a confidential meeting. It absolutely has got to be confidential. Some will actually ask for a non-disclosure agreement, which we're glad to give them, because this is a very sensitive and confidential matter. It affects, their families, their employees, their customers, their vendors. It affects, their livelihood. So, but typically we talk about what I call the big decisions of, who do you think your successor is? How much money do you need? What's your timeline? What's your plans after? After you retire, and really, and this applies to all business owners. The fifth one is, are you ready? And are you ready spans all business owners, right? Regardless of they've just started the business or if they're 55 and thinking about retiring and exiting the business at age 60. So we really frame the conversation around those topics. And we just listen. And at the end of that conversation, I have a fairly good idea of A, whether I can work with that individual or those individuals, and B, I propose to them what next steps are.
Okay, so there's a common refrain as we do these podcasts with our members. It's along the lines of the first meeting, we want to know what their thinking is. We listen a lot. So it's not about Tom Baer, it's not about your CPA firm, it's about, can I help this owner? And I suppose on the other end, it's the owner's thinking, are you the right guy?
Absolutely.
And that's a lot of what that conversation is all about. So when that client comes into you, how did he or she get into your office? What did you do some marketing? Is it usually a referral from your other CPA partners, an outside advisor? How do those people typically get in front of you?
So some of our exit planning, succession planning customers are our clients, and some are not. Percentage-wise, actually more of my this year, I would say, and I think it probably moves year to year, are really prospects. They're not clients of the firm, and that's really a factor of I've continued to build relationships in our market with referral sources, with business owners, with bankers, attorneys, advisors, business coaches that work with these business owners, and they're comfortable with me and the approach we take. We speak a lot. We're willing to go out and we have our own programs. We participate in programs that others put on, whether it's a bank or a wealth manager or whatever.
And you're talking about exit planning.
We're talking about exit planning. We're talking about, the tax laws and how they affect exit planning. So, we talk a lot, and we talk about preparing, and we talk about risk, business risk, which kind of gets back to that question of, are you ready?
Right. So, and I think we maybe touched on this a little bit earlier. We talk about the exit planning process, but as a CPA, especially perhaps, that impacts so many other areas for that owner and that owner's business that you say, okay, this isn't necessarily exit planning to talk about these tax techniques or designs to reduce taxes, but it all folds into that. But your particular engagement may not be exit planning. It might be, we have to make a determination. Do we want to create other entities? Do we want to switch the form of the entity from C Corp to S Corp? Do we want to consider these other tax planning designs? Maybe in the context of exit planning, but it doesn't. Maybe it's just not exit planning itself.
Right, and I think it's comprehensive, right? And again, back to the point earlier, it takes time, right? If you're going to convert your entity structure, because maybe you're going to take in a private equity investor,
right,
you can't do that overnight. You've got to think through it. We want to try to mitigate the tax impact of all those decisions. The timing of it may be strategic in terms of when the right time to do it is. So it all gets back to the time issue. We just one of the clients we worked with this year came to us, and they had an unsigned letter of intent in front of them from a third-party buyer. And it was referred to me by another CPA, a good friend of mine who I've worked with for years, and we became. And at that point, they had decided they were gonna move forward with it, but before they signed it, they wanted to understand, the ramifications of some of the provisions, and so we got involved at that point. They engaged us, and we did a lot of tax planning, a lot of fairly high-level, complex tax planning to help them realize, the most benefit that they could. And over a 6-month period, that engagement went from start to finish, and we're still working with them on some tax planning. But in that case, unlike most of our exit planning clients, that will have sort of an end date, I think.
Right. Yeah, because they're going to be gone.
Sure.
They've sold the company.
Sure.
That's interesting. So when you're actually doing an exit plan for a client, I'm assuming that takes a written form.
Yes.
How do you prepare that written exit plan? And then secondly, how do you involve the lawyer, the financial planner, the business consultant? Let's say it's an inside transfer that's going to take 5 years, 6 years. How do you convey that to the owner and the other advisors in a way that is going to be understandable, and everybody sees what they have to do, when they have to do it, and so on? Because I'm guessing you're always at the head of the table in these plans.
Sure. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we understand who their key advisors are, and we try to involve them, engage them early in the process. Ultimately, we deliver, what a lot of BEI members refer to as a roadmap. We go through a process with them. We do due diligence in the form of looking at financial statements, tax returns. We go through a fairly comprehensive interview process with the business owners, trying to understand their goals. We try to dive into the business to understand where the potential risks are. What we come out of that process, having consulted with the appropriate team members, and you mentioned attorneys, bankers, a lot of times, especially an insider deal, there may be debt, personal guarantees on lines of credit, things of that nature that to transfer the business, you're going to have to make sure that that financial institution's comfortable with that next generation owner. Insurance advisors, financial advisors, clearly might be some family business consultants. Each engagement obviously might require some different advisors depending on the nature of it. We want to understand, we try to understand the industry, how they're performing against their peer group is really a big issue for us, because we really want to understand if there's areas of underperformance and how we can maybe improve the value of the business.
Wow.
Right?
That's very interesting. Yeah.
So we do all those things, and we try to deliver to them. Here's next steps. One of the things that we maybe do that's unique is we will bring in some of our other advisory services. One of the things we're seeing more and more, and of course, if you pick up the newspaper, you read about data security breaches every day, and the importance of technology. And so we do engage in our engagements with business owners. We will engage our technology team, and the technology team, typically it's really two parts of that technology team. One is really looking at their overall technology investment, their infrastructure, and whether or not there's opportunities there. And then the cybersecurity team will also look at them. If you follow large, read the Wall Street Journal, follow some of these larger companies, you'll find out that when they do an acquisition, they're investing significant dollars in a cybersecurity firm, really coming in and doing due diligence.
Right.
So at a smaller level for that middle market firm, we're doing that. We also have an HR consulting group that we will engage and bring in, because there's a whole soft side of leadership succession and clearly competencies that are lost when the business owner and all of their institutional knowledge of the business over the last 30 years leaves. We want to make sure that the next generation of owners and leaders, they have that ability.
I think this gives all of us really a good idea of how much there may be that needs to be done in what probably many advisors and owners think is just a very straightforward process.
Right.
It can, if you're going to do it right, it may take a lot of time. You may be involved in areas like cybersecurity. Who really would think that, oh, cybersecurity, that's not exit planning, but it can be a make or break scenario in an exit plan.
Yeah.
And so what we need to have is a process that the owner understands, the roadmap you're talking about, so they can just really even visually see what this is going to look like. And then to have a leader of a team like Tom Bear who can take the client and the advisors and maybe the management team through this process. And as we talked about earlier, that process may never end, because if we transfer it to the management team, then your relationship's probably going to continue, and you just keep moving on this planning road that really, in a sense, should never end.
You know, it really comes down to what Stephen Covey said, which is, begin with the end in mind. I mean, we all are in business because we want to provide for our families and we want to create wealth for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So many times, and all of us fall victim to this, we get so embedded in our business that we don't step back and look at the bigger issues. And the bigger issues are, we take on a new partner, we take on a new product line, we do some new things, and we don't update, our documents, our governance, and we don't address these risks that we have in the business because we're too busy, pursuing new customers. Mm-hmm. And we find ourselves at the wrong moment. Something happens. Maybe we get a surprise offer from a competitor, and we're just not prepared for that. Yeah. And that's all embedded in this idea of exit planning.
Right. Well, the other thing Stephen Covey mentioned, speaking of Stephen Covey, he has his famous quadrant, right?
Right.
So that quadrant is something that's immediate and important. Owners focus on that, but exit planning is the important but not immediate, right, that's overlooked all the time.
Right.
And that's the purpose of this podcast, probably as much as anything else, is to bring awareness to advisors and owners of the need to start this process early so that planners like Tom Bear can do the job properly. That, at the end of the day, is why we plan.